Yeah.
Right. Right. Let me record for everyone. I'm also going to spotlight myself. Okay. We're on to the last section of this chapter, which is the Jewish people. I don't know why it's been taking so long, but from now on it shall not. We're going to look at the origins of the Jewish people. Yeah, origins of the Jewish people. Now, we talked about the uniqueness of the Jewish people. It's actually funny. My brother told me the other day there was he said there was a certain non-Jew who went up to a Hasidic rabbi and said, "Why is it that all the Jews seem to be successful in business?" Right? So the Hasidic rabbi said it's very simple. If you had 3 times a day where you fully devoted and concentrated on nothing else but business, you'd also be good. I mean, anyway,
Okay, nice.
pardon?
Yeah, okay. Go with
Yeah.
that one.
Anyway, um, but okay, so we looked at Jewish uniqueness. We're now going to look at the origins of the Jewish people. Origins of the Jewish people. It's interesting. There are various things that we look as if kind of they're, of course they're there, but we don't look back at origins. Simple things. People do. I think I once referenced the book called Thanks a Thousand, where the author, whose name eludes me, is a New York best-selling author. He's a Jewish fellow. I can't remember his name. Where he traced his cup of coffee back. I tell you about this. Did you do this once? It's amazing. It's an amazing thing called Thanks a Thousand. He traced his cup of coffee with an aim of thanking 1,000 people. Meaning, he basically thanked the person who served the coffee, which was quite rare. And then he went back, kind of backstage almost, and thanked the cleaners in the coffee chain, sorry, the store. And then he tracked down the delivery people who take the coffee beans. And then he asked them kind of how they stay awake because they deliver at 2 in the morning, whatever. And they said, well, we put on certain music. So he called the singer up and thanked them, and etc. He went on a plane where the coffee beans were made and farmed and clear, the whole thing. He managed to thank 1,000 people for his cup of coffee. Called Thanks a Thousand. Remarkable, remarkable, remarkable work.
Mm.
Anyway, so we're very used at looking things, oh, it's here without looking at origins. I even, it's funny, I challenge you next time you've got a bottle of something, just have a look. Okay, oh, where did that? Why is that there? Why is that here? We often don't. I was told as a child, and I have no reason to believe it's false, but I also haven't researched it whatsoever, that, very interesting thing, that um, um, there was a group that approached Head and Shoulders, meaning the hair company, the shampoo company, with an interesting proposition. Yeah, what was that proposition? They said, we've got an idea that is going to make you millions and millions and millions of dollars, but we're only going to give it to you if you pay us however many thousands, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. The company agreed. And what was the idea? I don't know. So the idea was as follows. Head and Shoulders is an anti-dandruff shampoo, right?
Mhm.
So the idea was put on the back of the bottle for best results used twice, right? Which
Mm.
is true. In other words, for best results used, I mean, if you do two hair washes, you're more likely to get more dandruff off the once. Right? But of course, once people see that at the back of the bottle and they're interested in removing any flake of dandruff, what do?
Use it twice
Use it
and
twice. What
get through
does
it twice as quickly.
Exactly. So it absolutely, if legend is correct, sales skyrocketed, or at least kind of whatever, peaked or improved, and these group of people got a lot of money. I bet Gideon is fact checking that, aren't you? Right. Okay. So we are up to the origins of the Jewish people. I haven't actually got my text in front of me. Hold on. So I'm going to go back. You can still see me, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just typing as we speak, um, which is fine. Okay, so we were looking at the origin of Jewish people. Now the question is why and what? I think that's probably the best way of saying it. Meaning, why is there? Why do you have this origin of Jewish people? What's going on? What like? At what point was this idea this has to be? At what point was it we want the Jewish people? Where was the origin from? Is it what we call a chatchila b'diavad? In other words, what's kind of ideal, or it was only after we sinned? Kind of where's all of that going? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I still need to find it properly, but at least I've got it more or less. Let's share this. Yeah, can you see the screen?
Something's happening. There we are.
Thank you.
It's whirring. Okay, good.
Got it.
Right, so I just need to go all the way. We've actually covered quite a lot, to be honest. Challenges to free will we've done. Going all the way down. I'll tell you what I'm actually sharing with you this evening. That is a very, very beautiful. Oh, sorry, I need to switch the plug on as well. Sorry. It's a very beautiful piece of Ramchal. It's actually quite a central piece of Ramchal. It's quite a central piece of Ramchal. Because it's really dealing with also the question as to whether the concept of the Jewish people is racist or not. Now, he's not doing that overtly, but kind of from what he says, it kind of emerges. So let's have a look at this. Second. Jewish unity we've done. It should be straight after here. And indeed it is. Otherwise, I'm going to cry. Okay, here we go. So he says like this. V'hinei, actually, we'll start from the beginning. Adam Arishan. You see this? Wait, can you see what I'm reading at the top? Like Adam Arishan, doing a lot of Hebrew and obviously translation, but here we go. Adam Arishan kodem cheto. Adam Arishan before his sin, hayabamatzav elyon ma'od, was in a very high or elevated state, is the better way of putting it, right? You can't say, high nowadays has connotations. Mimashahu ha'adam ata. Yeah, he was much more elevated than mankind is today. And we've already explained this in Chelek Aleph Perek Gimel. Madregas hanoshis lefi matzavahu haisa madreg nechweres ma'od. Ru'uya lamala rama nitzchis k'moshe kasav nu. Was also mankind in general. I mean, there weren't many of them, to be honest, right? At those times what it means is the soul of man was at an elevated status, and had he not sinned, had he not sinned, Adam Rishon would have actually gotten even higher. Meaning, basically, Adam Rishon, the way they put it, I don't know I think it's actually not in this piece, a different piece. He was at a point where his body could be fully elevated by his soul. Fully elevated by his soul, and thus not necessitating, if I can say it like that, any need for body and soul to be separated and cleaned, which we call death, right? Because his soul was powerful and his body could be overpowered by the soul. He calls it a kind of 50-50 equilibrium. Others talk about the fact that it's easier to choose good than bad. Yetzer hara, meaning any negative drive was outside of him, it wasn't part of him. All of that. Now, what then happened was something cosmic and tragic and seismic, because the way it's supposed to work is that the universe is supposed to reflect mankind. In fact, Torah, mankind, and the world are supposed to be triangular mirror images of each other, right, in makeup. And therefore, just like Adam was very nicely poised, good and evil, but easier to choose good, apparently, so too the world had that equilibrium. If you like, the forces of impurity on one side, the forces of purity on the other side, and it would have been easier to choose good. But here's what is happening. V'hinei, says the Ramchal, ba'osa matzav atov, at that great kind of spiritual, almost utopia, hayalo laholid tolados misbar mishar mechachmaso yisbarach shmo, al piamitas masharoi l'shleimus anenim betuvi yisbarach shmo. What would have happened had Adam not sinned is he would have had children who would have had the same elevated soul as him. Now, again, free will was still there. You could have chosen to ignore that soul, but in terms of the essential level, it would have been Adam's soul. Why? Because his principle is parents will bequeath to their children, if that's the right word, a similar level soul as the parents. Again, I think we're talking more essential level, not like nowadays, well, the parents did some sin, so the kid is born into sin. None of that. Born into sin is a different religion. Yeah? Okay. I know it's a bit esoteric. We're going to get there. And everyone would have benefited from having a soul as elevated as Adam. However, told us nigzeru v'shoru milfanav yisbarach shmo misharim behad ragos miyuchados. Right? What would that mean? These souls would have been akin to Adam's soul, and Perush Shiyubahem Roshim Nitpal Mishroshim Anafim Imshachim Zeh Zeh. They would have been like branches of the original soul, Ki Ilonos Van Fehem, just like branches and like trees and branches. Misbar Ilonos Misbar Anafim Akol Mesho B'Tachlis Dikduk, and it would all have been kind of very, very equal and very, very similar. That is all pre-sin. In other words, as history was supposed to happen pre-sin, if you can say that, is Adam's soul was elevated, he would have had kids with an elevated soul, and they would have started from a much higher level. Yeah, it's equivalent of getting, I don't know, a 200-meter head start in a 400-meter race. Okay? Now, v'hinei, b'cheto yarad ma'od mimadregaso, when it came to his sin, he fell terribly from his madrega, his level. V'nichal min hachoshech v'achira shir gadol, and he was he basically, I guess, enticed upon him this what he calls choshech, darkness. Achiras means when things are muddily, in other words, not clear. Shir gadol, a tremendous amount of haze. Yeah, and what happened at that point? Sorry, I did that a bit quickly. Klal hamin hanoshi, which means mankind in general, yarad mimadrigaso, fell a level, because remember he is emblematic of mankind, and in fact his kids are going to be born with a similar soul as him. So the kids born after the sin, yeah, are going to have now a lower level soul. Again, it's not just because he sinned, it's because he changed the makeup of his soul entirely. We'll talk about that soon. And they would have a much lower soul, bilti ru'ya, which is not fitting, lemala harama nitzchis, to this high level, shisatedla, that was destined initially for him, barishona, means at the beginning, below nishar, sorry, the highlighting's gone. Really, I need like a Disney character to highlight the words and everyone can sing along. Velo nishar mezuman muchen, and it was not ready. In other words, he was no longer ready. Ela madrega pchusim imeno, he's only fitting for a lower level. Pchisus rav, meaning quite a low level compared to where he was. V'china zos holid tolados ba'olam kulam madrega shvala zos shezacharno. And on this level, he now has to, he now has children on a much lower level.
There were no children before the sin, right?
It depends a little bit how you read it. Rashi does say that he had children before he was kicked out. Whether that was before or after sin, yeah, it depends how you read it. Meaning, let's put it like this. The psukim that talk about him having kids are after the psukim that talks about him having sinned.
Right. Okay. And the other thing that I wasn't expecting you to be saying here is it sounds as though that the initial plan was for Adam and Eve to have children, and yes, they'd be born in a very spiritual level, but the world would go on. I had understood that if they'd have only made it through to Shabbos, then that would have been it. You know, Hashem's achieved everything he wanted, and the whole world. So I don't understand. It sounds like you're saying the plan would have been ideally for there to be kids also at a high level, everyone living body and soul at a high level.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. Meaning, remember, kids also didn't have a 9-month gestation period, but presumably, yeah, it does sound like that. It's not 100% proven because here he happens to be talking about having kids, so he wants to compare what it would have been him having kids before the sin versus afterwards. It doesn't necessarily show it as an ideal to have kids before the sin because it could be, all right, it would have gone into Shabbos. But he wants to show you a contrast in this is now what's going to happen after the sin. It's going to be very important for the point he's making.
So, you're saying even according to this, it could be that if Adam and Eve had made it to Shabbos, that would have been Hashem achieved everything.
Could be. I'm not sure he does agree with that, but you can't prove it from here. Yeah. Okay. Right. So Amnam Afal Piken, despite this, just over here. That's where it gets a bit confusing. It means even though he dropped a few levels, there's still some form of semblance or some form of something connecting him back to what he once was. Right? Again, How much that affected his current soul, I don't know. But he says it's not completely removed. And he's still got it in the trophy cabinet, so to speak. He's not pushed out entirely, such that he can no longer return to the initial level. In other words, even though he's fallen many levels, it's not that that initial soul is completely inaccessible. Aval but nimsa b'foel, in practicality, he is b'madrega shvala. He is on a low level, a b'china kochanis at a madrega leona, and that high level is no longer actual; it's just mere potential. Right? So far, so good.
Okay.
Okay. Now, here's
So,
where we.
so
Go
are we
on.
saying that Adam, and in fact, are we even then saying us as well, have got within us that kind of glorification soul within us? It's
So
just its potential.
yeah. So hold on.
It's not.
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get all of that. We're gonna do all of that. We're gonna
Okay.
do it. At the moment, we're just Adam pre-sin and now post-sin. We now have to deal with the kids. Adam Baruch Hu, if now told us him, the children of Adam, it just doesn't mean direct, also descendants, were given they were given the ability to, at the moment, remember, they have this low-level soul that they've been given by Adam. Right? But they've got the ability to then raise that soul, and to place them on a higher level soul. And they were given a time period to achieve this. In other words, basically what Hashem says to them is, look, you've got X number of generations to then decide or to perfect your soul. Now, when I say that, just let me define this. When we talk about nowadays perfecting your soul, that's not what we're talking about in Adam's times. Nowadays, perfecting your soul means doing good things, right? And a kind of slight elevation, or the soul will be impacted, affected, or you'll tap into your soul, maybe more accurate. In those days, we're talking about you were able to fix the level of your soul because there was an essential change that you could make. You had Adam pre-sin, we'll call it a, I don't know, 100% horsepower soul, right? Then post-sin, you're going down to 30. And that generation can now decide through actions and major decisions to move their soul back up to the 100 notch. We can't do that nowadays. We're just stuck at 30. We choose to do good or bad. There's an essential choice they can make, right? He gave a certain amount of time. Okay, let's ignore that. Now, it says like this. Hine, Rasa Chachma Eliona, Hayos Roish Shtadlis, Yachalkik Lesharshi Anafi. So Hashem basically split this into roots and branches. How so? Perish, Shebitz Chiles Manish Sadadush Lesharashim Shebetoldas. Initially, we'd be able to fix up our roots. That means the essential choice that I outlined above. And afterwards, we'd get to the branches. Behind who this means, right? Mankind at that point, it's a little bit esoteric, but it does explain a lot. So just bear with us. Mankind at that point was able to fix up minakil kulim, any damage that had occurred to it, basically through Adam's sin. Right, and therefore we would have been able, we could have fixed up mankind, to get back to that higher level. And at that point, had we got to that level, our kids would have also started on that level. Because branches follow roots. Okay, now what actually happened? Right, everyone good with the plan? So Adam's soul falls. We're given opportunities to come back to that soul, that higher soul. But what actually happens? So he says that in this paragraph, he says that that time was limited, a limited opportunity. I'm just going to skip that. And now he talks in the history what actually happened. That entire time, you basically, there were tzaddikim who were reminding people, go do this job. Choose to fix up your soul. Like Chanoch, Metushelach, Shem, Aver, Masir Mosan, Shitak Noatzmam. They warned them to correct themselves. right? The kiven shed nismalu satam shalabrius, which is man plaga, shafat midishmati isbarach, at the time where Hashem had nearly had enough, which is dar haflaga, another generation of Tarabavel, Hashem basically said, right, we're going to give a final deadline to be able to for people to be able to fix their souls, essentially. Right, that's this different paragraph. We want to get to Avram Avinu in a second, and we're going to get there, etc. Basically there was a period. Here we are over here. There's a period in history whereby everyone could basically fix their level. It's almost, I guess, to an extent, probably the best marshal is a bit like a starting grid in a Grand Prix or kind of a car race, as everyone at that point could fix their level of their soul, and their kids would have the level of soul that they fixed. Now, he says what actually happened. So he says, Avram Levado, let's do over here. The only one who basically grabbed that opportunity with both hands was Avram Avinu. Ilan Me'ula. He became a tall tree, Vikar, and a precious one. Basically, he fixed up his soul, right? And he was the one who achieved it. No one else bothered to. Despite warnings, despite opportunities, despite various actually bits of help from Hashem. It says at that point, Nischalek ha'olam, the world, don't worry, I'm going to summarize and explain. The world was split into 70 nations. Kol echad madregasa yidua, each one according to its level. But each one had the post-Adam sin soul, call it 30%, right? But since Avraham fixed up his soul, right, he bequeathed that soul down to his descendants. We had a high level soul, which, by the way, higher and lower doesn't mean better or worse in terms of nations. It just means different responsibilities. Building the spiritual core versus building the physical shell. That's probably a different time. Anyway, so he says, so at that point, you've got Avraham, who's fixed up his soul. He's got a higher or kind of more elevated soul, and he bequeathed that to his descendants. However, he says, there were other chances as well. He says, let's see if we can get towards the end of this paragraph. Yeah, he says over here in 234, Lo haisa hagzeira la'avid asa umas ha'ela, lo haisa hagzeir shishar mariga shvala shezacharno, v'min anosha roi shlo yimotze ilu lo chatad rishon, v'hu b'cheto garam lo shimotze, which basically means there was still an opportunity for mankind. Meaning, actually, I probably should have skipped here. He said there was one more chance. Sorry, I skipped it. Given to mankind over here, which is, do you remember? There's this medrash, this very odd medrash about Hashem offering all the nations the Torah. You know that one? It's like very, very odd because we've been taken out of Egypt, we suffered, we were in slavery, and then Hashem says, "Hold on a second, let me just check." It's like odd, right? Very odd, right? What was it doing here? So he basically explains it, the Ramchal. He says, this was the nation's last chance. In other words, you've got one more chance. Do you want to fix up your soul, which at that point meant receiving Torah, right? Do you want to do it or not? They rejected it, and that was it, game over. At that point, all other nations' souls were absolutely fixed, as was ours. So what you had at that point, and this is an essential difference, is that you had the soul of the Jewish people from Avraham, and those who cleaved him and eventually accepted the Torah. They've got a different type of soul than everyone else. Again, the spiritual anatomy here is very simple. Adam had an elevated soul. He sinned. That went down. Everyone else was given a choice to then be able to fix up their soul. The only one who did that was Avraham. And your spiritual rule is that your soul, your level of soul, you bequeath to your descendants. So you end up with Avraham and his descendants having one type, and everyone else who didn't fix up their soul having a different type. That's basically the spiritual anatomy of what's going on here. Basically, to be honest. Right. So what comes out of there before next week? Actually, we're going to start a new unit, if I can get it on screen, which is called Future Focus. I hope it's down here. Very good. Future Focus, talking about Moshiach and Beis Hamikdash and all that kind of stuff. Very exciting. But what basically, what have we done tonight? You know, it has been esoteric, but what have we done? So we've gone through this Ramchal, which again is really, really important, talking about the origins of the Jewish people. And what comes out is that the origins of the Jewish people is not just we happen to have a certain history or culture or anything like that. There's an essential difference. I say that very carefully. There's an essential difference, meaning Avraham essentially changed his soul, and therefore his kids had a certain, if you like, leaning, right? Certain propensity or certain exposure to that soul. Others didn't, and therefore they have a separate soul, hence a separate mission. So one of the things we talk about when we talk about is Jewish people racist, right? Is that concept going to racist? So we talked about, the ethnic, the kind of the whatever, all the ethnic groups and what's kind of racist and what's not. I think the Ramchal would answer as follows. He would say it's not racist to say something that's true. I know that's very, very, we have to be very careful with that statement because it can be absolutely manipulated. But it's not, for example, I know it sounds funny. It's not racist, and I say this without any form of any form of either snobbery or any form of putting people down. It's not racist to say that someone black has darker skin than someone who's white. That's just, I'm not saying that in negative sense. That's just a description of skin color. If you then say, pardon?
It's an observation.
Yeah, there's an observation. It's true fact. Now, if you then say, and therefore such and such are behave like this and these behave like that, that's racism. That's where it starts, right? If it's something, again, I'm going with the Ramchal. The Ramchal would say very simple. In the spiritual anatomy of how things work, the Jews ended up with a different type of soul to everyone else. That's not a superiority complex or an etc. Those are just the facts. No different spiritually than the physical facts of saying someone who's white has lighter skin than someone who's dark. You know what I mean? Now, again, once you then say, well, superior, inferior, etc., that's where it starts. That's where the discussion begins in terms of racism. But in terms of the pure facts of souls, that's the way the Ramchal puts it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of. Okay, so that's basically what we've done tonight. It would have been remiss had we not tackled it. That was quite difficult tackling it together. Next week, we're going to start, please God, our Jewish future unit. It's very exciting. It's going to be about what's going to be like in Mashiach and the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and what's it going to be, what's resurrection of the dead and how all of that works. Please God, it's going to take us quite a few weeks, but that, please God, is the plan. Good?
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye
Have a
all.
good night.
Bye.
See you, everyone.
Bye.